The year was 1941, and the night sky over the Soviet Union was burning. Cities were collapsing into ruin. Villages were swallowed by flame. Millions fled as the German war machine advanced like a steel tide across the east. Every day, the front line moved closer. Every night, the darkness filled with the echoes of artillery, the rumble of tanks, and the cries of soldiers and civilians. The Soviet Union was on the edge of collapse. In this chaos and terror, a single idea emerged, an idea so bold, so unthinkable, that no country in the world had ever tried it before. Women will fly. Women will fight. Women will bomb the enemy at night, not as nurses, not as medics, not as assistants, but as combat pilots. The idea came from a woman as fierce as the war itself, Marina Raskova, the Soviet Amelia Earhart, a legendary aviator known across the USSR. She had survived an impossible crash. She had flown longer and farther than any woman before her. She had the ear of Stalin himself, and she was furious. The request that changed history. When Marina entered Stalin's office in October 1941, the air was thick with stress. Hitler's armies were approaching Moscow. Commanders argued. Maps lay scattered with retreat lines. Marina stood before Stalin and said, "We need more pilots. We need more planes. We need more soldiers." Stalin nodded. Then she took a breath and added, "We need women." The room fell silent. No military in history had allowed women to fly combat missions. But Marina's voice was steady. Women can do this. Women are ready. Women want to defend their country. Stalin studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "Do it." And with that single word, she changed the face of the war. The birth of the Night Witches. 3 all-women aviation regiments were formed. One for bombing, one for fighters, one for heavy night harassment attacks. But one regiment stood out, not because of glamour or advanced technology, because it was the most dangerous assignment of all, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. Their mission: fly at night, fragile planes deep behind enemy lines, drop bombs, escape into darkness. It was suicide, wrapped in wings of wood and canvas. Their aircraft? Not modern fighters, not steel bombers, but tiny Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes, designed originally for crop dusting and training. They were so light you could lift the tail with one hand, so slow that German fighters often stalled trying to chase them, so simple that they had no radio, no armor, and barely any instruments. But they had one advantage: silence. To evade the enemy, the pilots would cut their engines before the target, glide down through the night, and release their bombs with nothing but the whisper of wind in the canvas wings. To the terrified German soldiers below, that eerie sound in the darkness was the sound of witches flying on brooms. Thus the name, Nachthexen, the Night Witches. The recruits, the women who volunteered, were not warriors. They were students, teachers, farm girls, factory workers, clerks, athletes' daughters who had never left home. Some were only 17. They left behind their families, their studies, their dreams, their lives, because their country was dying. They arrived at the training camps wearing men's uniforms that didn't fit, boots stuffed with rags, belts that wrapped twice around their waists, hair cut short, eyes burning with determination. Marina Raskova greeted them with a cold, fierce truth. "You are not here because you are women. You are here because you are pilots, and the enemy will not show mercy." Training in hell. Training was brutal. They learned to fly in darkness, to navigate without lights, to land on frozen, broken runways, to assemble bombs with frostbitten fingers, to repair planes themselves because mechanics were scarce. They burned with cold. They starved. They trained until sunrise, slept an hour, and trained again. But they did not break. They became pilots, navigators, mechanics, armorers, sisters in war. One trainee wrote in her diary, "I am afraid every night. But I am more afraid of what will happen to my mother if we lose." They were determined. They would not fail. The first night of war on June 8, 1942, the regiment received its first combat mission. The airfield was dark. The Po-2 planes lined up like ghosts. Engines sputtered. Women climbed into open cockpits, wearing men's leather jackets 2 sizes too big. The commander shouted, "Witches, into the night!" One by one, the fragile planes rose into the air, 2 women in each, a pilot and a navigator. Their target, a German camp near the Don River. The night was moonless, clouds thick, the ground invisible. They flew low, so low the branches of trees brushed their wings. As they approached the target, the pilot cut the engine. Silence. Just the glide, just the wind, just the heartbeat in her chest. The navigator whispered, "Now!" They dropped their bombs. Explosions bloomed across the German encampment below. Shouts, panic, scrambling soldiers. The witches turned toward home, engines roaring again. They had done it. Their first mission, their first victory. The first night the Germans learned to fear the sound of silence. The legend begins by morning. German intelligence reports were clear. Women pilots attacked our camp last night. They flew silently. They came like ghosts. Our soldiers call them night witches. The name spread across the front. The witches had arrived, and they would not stop until the war was over. Night fell again across the wide, broken fields of the Eastern Front. It was June 1942, and the war was devouring everything in its path. Villages burned. Fields turned to ash. Rivers ran dark with oil and blood. The night witches had flown their first mission and succeeded, but a single night of victory was nothing in a war shaped by suffering. The second night would be different, much different. Tonight, the witches would meet the true power of the German war machine. They had stepped into hell. Now hell stepped back. The night grows deadly after their successful first strike. The regiment returned to their base, a rough, muddy field with tents for barracks. They slept for only an hour before being shaken awake. Mission briefing. All pilots report immediately. The women stumbled from their cots, exhausted, with cold air biting at their faces. Their commander, Yevdokia Bershanskaya, stood tall, her face carved with steel. "The Germans have reinforced the sector," she said. "They brought searchlights and anti-aircraft guns. They are ready for us tonight." Silence filled the tent. Someone whispered, "Are we still going?" Bershanskaya stared at them, her eyes unblinking. "We fly." The second night, heavier, deadlier, the witches prepared their fragile Po biplanes again. But this time, the nerves were sharper. The fear was real. The navigators checked their maps repeatedly. Pilots adjusted their goggles with trembling fingers. Mechanics tightened bolts twice, then 3 times. The engines sputtered to life, growling, coughing, vibrating like angry beasts. The first plane began taxiing to the runway. A young pilot, Lida Litviak, later known as the White Lily of Stalingrad, whispered to her navigator, "I don't know what waits for us tonight." Her navigator answered, "Death waits for everyone. We just fly faster." They lifted into the darkness. The German response. A sky full of hunters tonight. The Germans were ready. Spotlights stabbed through the sky like white swords. Machine guns lined the forest edges. Flak cannons waited in rows like metal monsters. When the first witch approached, engine cut, gliding silently, the Germans heard something new. Not the whisper of canvas wings, but the sound of fear. A shout rose from the camp below. Achtung! Nachthexen? Alert! Night witches! The searchlights snapped on, sweeping across the black sky, and found them. A Po-2 was caught in the beam, its wooden wings glowing like bones. Then the night erupted. The first lost flak, cannons thundered. Black explosions blossomed around the tiny plane. Fragments tore through the canvas. Splinters ripped into the pilot's arm. The engine screamed. The navigator shouted, "We've been hit! We've been hit!" But the pilot kept the plane steady, eyes burning with defiance. She dropped her bombs, but the plane wouldn't climb. Smoke poured from the nose. Another burst hit the right wing. The plane spiraled. The radio crackled in their comrades' headsets. "We're going down." Static. Nothing more. The night witches had lost their first crew. The sky felt suddenly heavier. Grief in the dark. When the other pilots returned at dawn, they found 2 empty beds in the tent. No bodies had been recovered. No pieces of the plane. Just silence. Some pilots wept quietly. Others stared blankly into the cold ground. One wrote in her notebook, "She was laughing only hours ago. Now she is smoke in the night." Their commander let them grieve for 5 minutes. Then she said, "We fly again tonight." The women nodded through tears, because war does not pause for heartbreak. The witches adapt. To survive the night sky full of German fire, the witches began using new tactics. 1. The carousel maneuver. 3 planes would attack together. One would dive and attract the searchlights. A second would draw the anti-aircraft fire. The third would glide silently and drop the bombs unseen. They rotated roles so no one carried the danger alone. 2. Silent glide attacks. Before reaching the target, pilots cut their engines entirely. The plane turned into a ghost, just a shadow, just a whisper. German soldiers later said, "It was like death itself was coming through the darkness." 3. Flying at treetop level. They flew so low that branches scratched their wings. German radar couldn't detect them. Searchlights couldn't find them. But a single mistake meant instant death. A new fear grows in the German ranks. By July 1942, German units all along the front reported attacks from nowhere, bombs raining silently, engines cutting out right before impact, planes so small their bullets passed through. Officers wrote to Berlin, "These women are not human. They appear from the night like spirits." Some German soldiers refused to sleep at night. Others would panic at the sound of wind in the trees. A superstition formed. If you hear a whisper in the dark, the witches are already above you. The legend grew, the fear grew, and the witches embraced it. A night of fire and heroism. One night, near the Caucasus Mountains, the witches received intelligence. A massive German supply depot had arrived. Tanks, fuel, ammunition, trucks. A perfect target, but also heavily defended with multiple flak batteries. Bershanskaya gathered her pilots. "This mission will be deadly," she said. "No one will force you. Those who wish to stay behind may do so." Not one woman stepped back. They took flight, 12 planes, each carrying 2 women. As they approached, the Germans unleashed everything: searchlights, tracers, flak cannons, machine guns, even fighter planes. The sky became a cage of fire. 3 planes were hit. One burst into flames, spiraling to the ground. Another limped away, losing altitude fast. But the witches pressed on. They cut their engines. Silent, invisible, deadly. One by one, they glided over the target and dropped their bombs. The fuel tanks erupted, an explosion so massive it lit the sky like dawn. German soldiers screamed and ran. The witches pulled up hard, engines roaring back to life, escaping into the darkness. The night the legend was sealed. When the survivors returned to base, exhausted and wounded, Bershanskaya stood waiting. "You did what no one else could," she said quietly. They had destroyed an entire German supply operation, with wooden planes designed for crop dusting. The Soviet High Command sent a message: "Your actions saved thousands of our soldiers. Your courage will never be forgotten." The Night Witches had become more than a regiment. They had become a myth, a story whispered by both sides of the war. But their darkest nights were still ahead. The Night Witches had become a name that echoed across the front. To the Soviets, they were heroes. To the Germans, they were something far more terrifying: a whisper in the dark, a shadow on the horizon, a sound like a broom sweeping through the night sky, the last sound a soldier might ever hear. But legends come with a price, and the price was about to be collected. The Luftwaffe takes notice. For months, the Germans had underestimated the witches. Small wooden planes, women pilots, night attacks without radios or instruments. They thought it was a nuisance, an annoyance in the dark. But after the witches destroyed fuel depots, ammo convoys, supply trains, and command posts, the German High Command grew furious. Field Marshal von Richthofen, relative of the infamous Red Baron, declared, "These witches must be eliminated." He assigned elite Luftwaffe fighter pilots to hunt them, not trainees, not rookies, aces. Men who had shot down Spitfires, Hurricanes, Yak fighters, American bombers, Soviet attack planes. These were predators trained to kill. Their aircraft, Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf FW190. Fast, deadly, armored, built for war. The witches flew, Po-2 wooden biplanes with a top speed slower than a German fighter's landing speed. It was not a fair fight. It was the sky turning into a slaughterhouse. The first hunts begin one moonlit night, near the Kuban River. Two witches, Nadia Popova, pilot, and Yevgenia Zhigyelenko, navigator, took off for a routine bombing run. The sky looked calm. Too calm. As they approached their target, Nadia felt something wrong, an instinct sharpened by months of flying through death. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Yevgenia listened, at firsting. Then a faint hum. Growing louder, faster. Nadia's eyes widened. A fighter. She pushed her plane into a dive just as a stream of trace ripped past their tail. The night exploded into light. A Messerschmitt Bf-109 was on them. The deadliest dogfight of the night. The German pilot fired again, bullets slicing through the air. The Po-2 had no armor, no weapon, no speed. It was a moth fleeing a hawk. But Nadia Popova was no ordinary pilot. She yanked the control stick, dropping them low over the treetops. Branches brushed the wheels. The navigator held her breath. The German fighter dove after them, engines screaming like a beast. Another burst of fire. So close the heat scorched Nadia's face. But then something happened the German never expected. He slowed down. Too much. The Po-2 flew so slowly that the Messerschmitt, built for speed, nearly stalled. The German had to pull up. Nadia seized the moment. "Hold tight!" She cut the engine. The plane became a shadow, a whisper, invisible. The fighter overshot them, lost them completely, and soared upward, searching desperately. Nadia restarted the engine, barely, and escaped into the night. They survived. But they knew. The real war in the sky had begun. Tragedy over the canyon. The Luftwaffe intensified their efforts. Night after night, German fighters patrolled the skies, searching for the telltale whisper of Po-2 wings. And one night, they found it. Two young witches, Katya Ryabova and Sasha Maximova, were on their fourth sortie of the night when an FW-190 descended from above like a falling star. They never saw it coming. The cannon fire shredded their wooden wings instantly. Their plane burst into flame, spiraling downward. Witnesses on the ground reported seeing a burning streak, a shower of wooden fragments, and two silhouettes falling through the darkness. They were killed before they hit the earth. The next morning, the witches found their charred plane. Inside were the remains of two women who had laughed with them only hours earlier. Death sat with them at breakfast. The strategy of survival the witches adapted again. To beat the Luftwaffe, they developed new tactics designed to exploit their greatest weaknesses. Fly only in darkness, no moon if the sky was too bright. They stayed grounded. 2. Never fly alone, pairs or trios only. 3. Use false drops. One plane pretended to attack to draw fire, while another glided silently toward the real target. Glide low. Climb high, change altitude constantly to confuse radar and fighters. Turn off the engine any time. This terrified new recruits, but saved lives. A night of 7 hunts in August 1942. The Luftwaffe organized a massive operation to ambush the witches. 7 German fighters patrolled the night in coordinated patterns. The witches launched anyway, because Soviet troops on the front were desperate for support. Masha Dolina, flying with her navigator Vera, was on her third mission of the night when a searchlight hit them directly. The Germans opened fire. "Engine off!" Vera screamed. Masha cut it immediately. The plane plunged. Tracer rounds filled the air above them. The German pilot dove after them, but again, the Po-2's impossible slowness saved them. The fighter overshot, rising too fast. Masha restarted the engine in mid-fall, pulled up sharply, and vanished behind a ridge. They lived, but others didn't. That night, the Luftwaffe downed 4 Witch planes. 8 women lost. Their empty beds the next morning felt like open graves. The moment, the war, after weeks of deadly hunts, something extraordinary happened. A German battalion commander radioed headquarters and said, "We cannot fight these women. They attack from anywhere. They are not normal pilots. They are demons in the sky." Fear had begun to poison the German ranks. Some soldiers refused to sleep. Others fired blindly into the night at shadows. A rumor spread. If you hear a broom in the wind, the witches have marked you for death. The psychological damage was immense. The Soviets realized the witches were not just a military force. They were a weapon of terror. A night to remember one mission stood out above all others. A mission that would define the legend. 3 witches, Nadia Popova-Rufa, Banina Irina Sibrova, were tasked with destroying a German artillery battery. It was heavily guarded, protected by 3 layers of flak guns, 2 searchlight towers, and WW190 patrol unit. The mission seemed impossible. Yet the witches flew. They glided in silence, only meters above the treetops. As the first bombs dropped, German searchlights found them. All 3 planes dove sharply. Gunfire filled the sky. An FW-190 chased Irina. She flew so low that she nearly sliced a barn roof. Another chased Nadia. She cut her engine, falling like a dead leaf. Rufa flew straight through a curtain of tracer rounds. When the dust settled, the German artillery battery was burning. 3 planes limped home full of holes. All 6 women survived. The legend was now undeniable. Winter came suddenly on the Eastern Front. Not with snowflakes, not with frost on windows, but with a knife. A knife of cold so sharp it cut through leather, canvas, metal, flesh, even courage. The airfields turned to frozen wastelands. Engines refused to start. Mechanics hammered ice off the propellers. Women woke with frost clinging to their eyelashes. Fuel thickened like syrup. And still, the night witches flew, because the Germans didn't stop for winter. So neither could they. But the cold brought dangers far greater than enemy fire. It brought a new enemy, the sky itself. The curse of the Po-2. In winter, the Po-2 biplane had always been fragile. Wooden frame, fabric wings, open cockpit. But in winter, it became nearly suicidal to fly. The women faced engines freezing mid-air, wings icing up, fuel lines cracking, frostbite within minutes, gloves as boards, numb hands that could barely hold controls, temperatures dropping to -40°C. In those temperatures, wind was not wind. It was a weapon. One pilot wrote, "My bones feel made of glass. My fingers no longer belong to me. The cold steals everything." They stuffed newspapers inside their uniforms, wrapped scarves around their faces until only their eyes showed, poured warm water over control sticks so they could move. And then they climbed to the sky, the most merciless battlefield of all. A night of ice, ants, and fire in December 1942, 6 witches were assigned to destroy a German supply convoy hidden deep in the forest. Snow covered everything. The moonlight reflected off the white ground, making camouflage impossible. Nadia Popova, now a veteran of dozens of battles, led the mission. As they climbed into the air, their breath froze instantly. The Po-2 engines groaned like dying animals. At 400 meters, Irina Sibrova's voice came over the radio. "My wings are icing. I'm losing lift." Nadia shouted back, "Dive! Drop altitude." Irina dove, ice cracking off the wings, and regained control. But the temperature kept dropping. At 800 meters, Masha Dolina's navigator screamed, "Engine temperature falling, we're freezing." The engine sputtered, coughed, died. The plane plunged. They were over black forest, no lights, no landmarks, no hope. Masha tried to restart. Nothing. She tried again. The ground rushed toward them. Then, in a moment of raw instinct, she hurled the plane into a steep dive. The drop warmed the engine just enough. It coughed back to life. They pulled up with seconds to spare. The entire crew sat in silence, shaking, and they still continued the mission. The attack on the winter convoy, after hours of freezing torture, they reached the target. The convoy glowed faintly, lanterns, trucks, German soldiers trying to hide in the dark. Nadia whispered to her navigator, "Cutting engine." The plane fell into silence, just a shadow gliding over a world of snow. The others followed, 6 witches, 6 silent ghosts. Irina Sabrova released the first bombs. They landed perfectly, exploding fuel trucks, igniting the forest in pillars of fire. German soldiers ran screaming, slipping on ice. Bullets flew upward blindly into the night. But the witches moved like spirits. They glided, dropped, climbed, attacked again. When they finally flew home, frozen and bruised, they had destroyed the entire convoy. But victory had a cost. The death of Anna Kazakova, 1Po2, did not return. Anna Kazakova and Tanya Merkulova, navigator, were missing. Hours passed. Radio silence. At dawn, search teams set out. They found the wreckage buried under snow, the wooden wings shattered, the fuselage broken into pieces, the cockpit crushed. Anna had tried to land after her engine froze, but the landing gear broke through the ice of a small lake. They drowned beneath the frozen water. Her journal was still inside the cockpit. The last line read, "Tonight, the sky is too cold, but I will fly anyway." The regiment buried them under a tree line. Snow gently on the simple wooden crosses. Some pilots cried. Some stared into the distance. The commander spoke softly. "Winter kills more cleanly than the enemy." Frostbite and fire, the cold did not spare anyone. Mechanics suffered frostbite on their hands. Navigators lost feeling in their toes. Pilots flew until their cheeks bled from windburn. Many came back purple, shaking, unable to speak. The base doctor warned, "Another night like this and your lungs will freeze." Nadia Popova replied, "Better frozen lungs than a defeated country." They flew again. And again. And again. 40 missions a night. Each pilot flying up to 8 sorties in freezing darkness. No warmth, no rest, no mercy. The miracle landing one night, Rufa Benina and her navigator Olena were flying over the Volga when ice began forming on the wings. Rufa tried to shake it off. Nothing. The controls stiffened. The engine lost power. They began to fall. Below them, the Volga River was a sheet of ice white, endless, deadly. Rufa shouted, "Hold tight. We're landing on the river." Olena screamed, "We'll break through." Rufa forced the plane down. The Po-22 skidded across the ice, spinning, sliding faster and faster. Then it stopped. Then it silence. Wind. Darkness. They were alive. The ice had held. They crawled out, freezing, disoriented, miles from base. But alive. At dawn, Soviet infantry found them walking barefoot on the ice, carrying their boots because they'd frozen solid. When asked how they survived, Rufa simply said, "We did not want to die tonight." Fears the witches never spoke of. The women of the 588th never admitted it publicly, but winter terrified them. It was worse than flak, worse than fighters, worse than searchlights, because winter kills without warning, without sound, without hatred. A simple gust of wind, a moment of engine hesitation, a thin layer of ice on the wings, and the sky would swallow them, but still they flew. Because every night, Soviet soldiers froze in their trenches, fighting, starving, praying for help. The witches gave them hope, a whisper above the snow, a shadow against the moon, proof that someone was still fighting for them. The winter that made. By the time winter ended, the night witches had flown thousands of missions, lost sisters, buried friends, survived temperatures that killed men twice their size, and struck more fear into German troops than any other Soviet unit. And yet, the war was far from over. The Germans were preparing a counterattack. The witches were running out of planes. Their bodies were exhausted. Their minds were fraying. And a new challenge was coming, one deadlier than winter and deadlier than the Luftwaffe, the battle for the Caucasus Mountains, a place where planes vanish, where storms eat aircraft whole, where a single mistake means death. The hardest chapter of their lives was about to begin. The winter had nearly broken them, but the mountains were something else entirely. The Caucasus Range rose like a wall between two worlds, sharp, jagged, ancient, merciless. Peaks jagged as broken knives, valleys deeper than the night sky, winds that screamed like living things, storms that formed in minutes and swallowed entire villages. And now the night witches were ordered to fly through this kingdom of death, to bomb German supply depots hidden in caves, troop movements concealed in narrow passes, and artillery positioned on impossible cliffs. The witches had survived winter. But the mountains were not simply cold. They were alive. And they were hungry. The first flight into the mountains, July 1943. The witches stood at the foot of the Caucasus Range. Their airfield was nothing more than a field carved into a hillside, surrounded by snow peaks that glowed faintly under the moon. The mission briefing was short. The enemy is hiding their supplies within the ridges. You will fly through the passes and destroy them. One pilot whispered, "Through the passes." Another answered, "At least if we crash, we won't feel it. We'll be vaporized." Nervous laughter, but their eyes were hard. They mounted their wooden biplanes, the fragile Polikarpov Po-2, never designed to fly between granite walls taller than skyscrapers. The engines sputtered, the wheels bounced on the uneven ground, then they rose into the sky, into darkness, into cold, into uncertainty. The first taste of terror as they approached the mountain range, the world changed. The air thinned. Winds twisted suddenly, slamming against the wings. The ground disappeared in blackness. Navigator Katya Shevchenko leaned over her map, trying to see. "I don't recognize anything. There are no landmarks." Her pilot, Lida, whispered, "Because the landmarks are cliffs." The Po-2 trembled as it entered the first valley. The moonlight barely reached the ground. The walls on both sides were so close they felt like they could be touched. Then a gust, a violent one. It slammed the plane sideways. The right wing scraped a rock face, shredding the fabric. Katya screamed. Lida fought the controls with numb, burning hands. They barely recovered. Behind them, another plane wasn't so lucky. Irina Sabrova's Po-2 hit a downdraft, a downward punch of wind so strong it could knock a falcon from the sky. Her plane dropped instantly. A shout over the radio, "We're losing altitude." Engine failing. Then silence. The Po-2 vanished into darkness. Irina and her navigator, Zoya Parfenova, were gone. Swallowed by the mountains. No wreckage, no bodies, just absence. The first casualties of the mountain's hunger. The enemy hides in shadows. The witches pressed on, grief clawing at their throats. Their targets were hidden deep in the passes. Trucks beneath overhangs, tanks hidden inside narrow ravines, fuel drums covered by camouflage nets, placed on impossible ledges, troops camped inside natural caves. The German generals were clever. They believed the mountains would protect them. They didn't know the sky belonged to witches. Lida's team reached the coordinates. Below them, faint glimmers of lanterns signaled a hidden outpost. She cut her engine. The plane fell into silence. Her navigator whispered, "Steady, steady." The mountains were so close she could see the texture of the rock. They released their bombs. A heartbeat of silence. Then the entire mountainside exploded in a cascade of fire and debris. The Germans panicked. Trucks ignited. Ammunition cooked off. Shadows ran in all directions. The witches pulled up sharply, engines roaring back to life, barely clearing the ridge. One mission complete. Too many more to go. A storm like a living beast. The next night brought something far worse than German fire. The witches launched a 10-plane raid, but halfway through the valley, the wind died. A strange, eerie calm. Navigator Vera Petrovna whispered, "This isn't right. Something's coming." Seconds later, the sky exploded. A mountain storm. born in minutes, invisible on the horizon. Lightning tore the sky open. Thunder echoed through the valleys like artillery fire. Winds slammed the plains like giant hands. The Po-2s scattered, some pushed upward, others thrown downward, some spun like leaves in a tornado. Pilot Olga Dragunova screamed into the radio, "I can't control her, she's going down!" Her plane hit a downdraft so powerful it cracked the struts. The Po-2 fell, spinning. Olga and her navigator jumped at the last second. Parachutes barely deployed. They landed on a cliff ledge, inches from falling to their deaths. Stranded, frozen, alive. Meanwhile, other witches continued the mission inside a storm so violent it erased the boundary between sky and earth. Hundreds of lightning strikes lit the mountains like a strobe. The women flew blind, hands numb, faces wet with freezing rain. A lesser pilot would have quit, but these were the night witches. They pressed forward. The rescue that shouldn't have been possible back at base, when Olga and her navigator didn't return, the regiment feared the worst. But one witch refused to give up, Nadia Popova. She said, "Storm or no storm, I'm going." Her superiors tried to stop her. No one flew in storms like this. Pilots had died trying. But Nadia had made up her mind. She took off alone. Winds shook the plane violently. Rain stung her skin. Lightning flashed dangerously close. She flew low across the cliffs, calling for Olga on the radio. Finally, a faint signal responded from the mountains. "We're here," on a narrow ledge. Nadia followed the signal. When she found them, she hovered above the cliff, searching for a place to land. There was none. She made one. She aimed the Po-2 at a slope barely large enough to stand on. The landing was a miracle, a controlled crash that saved lives. She dragged the two freezing women into the cockpit. 3 women, one tiny plane, weight far too heavy. She prayed. The Po-2 rolled, slipped, fell, then lifted. Barely. By the time they reached base, all 3 were crying, laughing, shaking alive. The mountains may have claimed pilots, but they had not claimed these. The deepest loss, but the mountains were not finished. During a later mission, a pair of witches, Sofia Oktyabrskaya and her navigator Tamara, were flying through a narrow pass when a sudden wall of fog engulfed them. Visibility, 0. Sofia tried to climb. She tried to turn. Too late. Their Po-2 slammed into the side of a cliff. The explosion echoed through the valley. The search party found nothing but burned fabric, splintered wood, and the smell of gasoline. Their loss broke the regiment. They had survived German aces. They had survived winter. They had survived storms. But the mountains were merciless. One pilot wrote, "I no longer fear the enemy. I fear the land." The witches' strike-back grief did not weaken them. It sharpened them. The Germans hid deeper. The witches flew deeper. The Germans used camouflage. The witches used silence. The Germans climbed to higher ledges. The witches climbed higher still. Night after night, they struck. Convoys in ravines, ammunition caches in caves, command posts lost to the world, artillery hidden behind ridges, sniper nests carved into cliff faces. No mountain was too high. No valley too deep. No storm too violent. They became creatures of the night sky, moving with the wind, slipping between peaks like shadows. Even German pilots began saying, "You cannot fight what you cannot see." The mountains lost their appetite. By the end of the mountain campaign, the witches had done the impossible. Flown more than 18,000 kilometers, destroyed dozens of German positions, crippled supply lines, weakened entire battalions, and survived terrain few pilots dared enter. But the cost was heavy. Too heavy. Many names were missing from the roster. Many beds were empty. Yet the witches kept flying, because there was one more chapter left, and it was the darkest chapter of all. The mountains had tested them. Winter had tried to kill them. The Luftwaffe had hunted them, but nothing could stop the night witches. By late 1944, the Red Army was pushing westward. The Germans were retreating across Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland. Cities once lost to the Nazis were being reclaimed. villages freed, roads rebuilt, and the 588th Night Bomber Regiment continued to fly night after night, mission after mission, carrying on their shoulders the weight of a nation. They had become legends. But legends do not retire quietly. Their final chapter would take place not in the Soviet Union, but deep inside Germany. Toward the heart of an empire by January 1945, the Night Witches were relocated closer to the Western front lines. Their new targets: German troop movements retreating toward Berlin fuel depots, artillery positions, bridges across rivers, train convoys, hidden command posts. The Po-2 planes, patched, battered, held together with wire and love, were now flying deeper than ever behind enemy lines. The danger was greater, the skies were more crowded, German anti-aircraft guns were more desperate, and the night grew darker as the war neared its end. But the witches pressed on, because victory was near, and they wanted to be there when the war finally died. The horror of the final months: the closer they came to Germany, the more horrifying the scenes below became. Burned villages, starving civilians, fields littered with destroyed tanks, frozen bodies in the snow, refugee columns stretching for miles, cities flattened into rubble. The witches flew above it all, silent spectators to the world's suffering. One pilot wrote in her diary, "I no longer know what winning looks like, only death. Everywhere." Yet they flew, because flying was the only thing they could still control in a collapsing world. A mission to end all missions. On April 28, 1945, the Night Witches received what would become their final major mission. The Red Army had nearly encircled Berlin, but a German artillery battery positioned outside the city was pounding Soviet positions mercilessly. If it wasn't destroyed, the assault on Berlin would stall. The Night Witches were chosen to eliminate it. 4 aircraft, 8 women. Exhausted, frostbitten, soaked from rain, but ready. Their commander, Bershanskaya, stood before them. "You have flown since 1942, she said. "You have survived when no one believed you could. Tonight is our last night. Let us finish what we started." No speeches, no cheers, just quiet nods. The calm of warriors who had nothing left to prove. The flight into the storm, they took off into a night filled with rain and wind. The German artillery fired continuously, each muzzle flash lighting the clouds like lightning. Searchlights swept the sky. Tracers streaked like red meteors. The witches flew low, dangerously low. Their navigator, Katya Ivanova, whispered, "This wind feels wrong." Her pilot, Olya Polunina, replied, "Everything about this war feels wrong." They pushed deeper. The German battery came into view, dozens of guns firing in coordinated bursts. Olya cut the engine, her Po-2 into silence. Behind her, the other witches followed, shadows gliding in formation, ghosts descending on the enemy's last breath. The final attack: the first bombs dropped, explosions ripping through the German artillery positions. Men scattered. Searchlights found one of the Po-2s, and anti-aircraft guns opened fire with deadly precision. A burst tore through the left wing of Nina Dernova's plane. Her navigator screamed. The plane spun. Nina fought the controls, but it was too late. The Po-2 struck the earth and exploded, a fireball in the darkness. 2 more names to be etched into the regiment's long list of sisters lost. But the mission continued. Olya released her bombs, then soared upward, praying through gritted teeth. Another witch, Zhenya Zhigyelenko, dove and released her payload, the explosions the last of the German guns. The German battery was destroyed. Smoke rose into the night sky like a dying ghost. The witches turned home, 1 plane short, 2 hearts missing forever. The last flight on May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over, and that night, the Night Witches flew one final time, not to bomb, not to fight, not to kill, but to say goodbye. They took off in formation and circled above their airfield, the same place where they had once learned to take off, to glide, to cut engines, to drop bombs into darkness. The Po-2 engines hummed like tired lullabies. The women looked down at the ground, knowing they would soon return to normal lives, if normal life was even possible. They circled 3 times. On the third circle, their commander spoke over the radio. "Thank you, my witches. It has been the honor of my life." One by one, they landed, and the night was still. For the first time in 3 years, their engines fell silent without fear of never rising again. After the war, what remained of them, the Night Witches, were officially awarded the title Guards, becoming the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment, and 23 of its members, more than any other female unit, were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest military honor in the entire country. But medals do not erase nightmares. Many of the witches struggled in silence, recurring dreams of crashes, guilt for friends who died, ringing ears from explosions, frostbite that never healed faces. They could not forget nights, they could never unlive. Some married, some became teachers, some became engineers, some never flew again. But all of them carried the sky with them. The legacy of the Night Witches: they flew over 30,000 missions, dropped more than 23,000 of bombs, lost over 30 of their sisters, fought through winter, storms, fire, cliffs, and impossible odds, with wooden planes, with canvas wings, with courage heavier than steel. German soldiers swore they were invisible, supernatural, unkillable. But the truth was far more powerful. They were just women, ordinary women who chose to do something extraordinary. Their story is proof that courage has no gender, that legends can rise from the humblest machines, and that even in the darkest nights, there are witches who fly.